Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I appreciate you traveling long distance during jet lag. You've had lunch, it's late in the afternoon. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief in hopes that I stimulate some interest, some inquiry, some dialogue. Happy to stick around afterward and talk a little bit more in depth. But my goal here today is to cause you to think a little bit differently about what you must do to protect yourself in the future and implement cybersecurity. We won't solve the problems here today, but at least we can start the dialogue, hopefully. So I want to thank Congressman Pittenger and Carol. Thanks for organizing this panel. I don't know if the congressman's in here, but I think we all owe him a round of applause. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, appreciate that. Let me ask for a show of hands. Whose government has been attacked or been compromised in some kind of cyber attack? Can you raise your hand if you've come from a government? So that's roughly a third to a half. The rest of you who did not raise your hands, you will be raising your hands at some point in a conference, I can assure you. The panel before was illuminating to me. I'm not an expert in crypto, but I learned a lot in that panel. Did everybody hear the comment toward the end of the panel when they said, networks are the battlefields of the 21st century? I heard that comment from one of the crypto folks. They get it. They understand the financial implications of a compromise of a network. And what I'm going to do here today is just give you some tidbits to think about, and then we can dialogue on it, hopefully. My experience in cyber starts off in the United States intelligence community. We had, at the time, 17 members, 17 different organizations, all of whom maintain our country's secrets. The idea of protecting those secrets as we've moved into a digital environment has been an existential issue for our nation. The problem where I worked is I worked for the Director of National Intelligence. And so how do we organize 17 different organizations so that we can effectively defend ourselves against a cyber attack? The truth of the matter is every organization thinks about it differently. Everybody does things differently. So in 2015, we decided we needed to join forces and have a collaborative approach to defending ourselves. We stood up our, our very first cyber defense center in the intelligence community, designed to protect the networks of the 17 organizations that all work together but operate independently. I was the first tech director, and the first technical challenge I confronted was everybody's doing things differently. So how do we organize ourselves and collaborate better? We set up what we would call a fusion cell. And I think the first lesson I want to impart to you from an operational standpoint is that computer network defenders have a very interesting way of thinking about things, but it's very hardware, software, and network-centric. The way things are evolving in cybersecurity, you cannot limit yourself to one way of thinking. So the fusion cell we set up had a variety of disciplines and a variety of organizations all co-located in one place. The design idea is to share what's happening across 17 different organizations and work the problems collaboratively rather than in isolation. And the multidisciplinary thing is very important because cybersecurity is quickly evolving away from hardware, software, and networks and into things like the insider threat. The insider threat would be a person who has access to your network because you've trusted them to have that access. That's not a detection of malware. That's an adverse effect on your network caused by a human being that you've given a trust relationship to. So as you think multidisciplinary, I'm going to argue that you should be talking to multiple organizations within your government. You should employ your security services to work to help do penetration testing and vulnerability testing of your most vital networks. You should consider isolating your networks that don't need to be on the public internet so that they cannot be accessed from outside the organization. And you should co-locate as many organizations as you can in a common effort to promote cyber defense. And that means bringing different disciplines in. We brought in counterintelligence experts. We brought in behavioral experts. We brought in multiple organizations doing things differently. And most importantly, we've started to embrace and work more closely with industry. To reflect a theme that was brought up in the last discussion, industry is often the very first line of defense because they see things sometimes before the government does. And keeping the firewalls down so that industry can disclose to the government what they're seeing, and the government can share things such as intelligence and threat information to allow industry to better prepare their products and services, and then keeping that flow of information going is a very vital thing. The next item I'm going to talk about is the move to a zero trust architecture. Our Department of Defense has decided to produce what we call a zero trust cyber architecture. What does that mean? It means nothing on our network, no data, no device, and no person goes unchallenged. And if you think about what that means, it means that we have learned enough about the severity of cyber threat to assume that we cannot stop things at the perimeter. Our networks will be compromised. Yours will too. What do you do on the day you discover that your network has been compromised? Thinking about it in advance, exercising it in advance, and having a plan for what the next few steps are is going to be very, very vital. You cannot protect your network at the 100% level. The idea of zero trust means that we've got to have redundancy, the ability to move to another network if necessary, if we cannot adequately protect the one that we're working on. And increasingly, you're going to have to think about reconstitution. Reconstitution means your network and your hardware has been so thoroughly compromised, you cannot remediate it. You will have to abandon it and rebuild your network. So backing your stuff up in a place which is inaccessible and having alternative network topologies and programs is going to be very key. And the idea of reconstitution means you better be thinking about what you do when you decide your network can't be recovered from its degraded state. I'll give you one quick example from my experience. We run a cyber war game. The intelligence agencies all get together and we spend 3 days in a cyber exercise in which our best cyber attackers attack our intelligence agencies. And the defenders all work together to try to defend it. One of the most comical things I've ever seen was the fact that while we were all focused on our network defense, making sure no malware was on our network, and that we could detect any insiders who might be conducting adverse actions on our network, all of a sudden all the telephones went dead. Now the cyber defenders needed to talk to each other in their various locations in order to coordinate defense, but the cyber attackers took out the telephone network, leaving us very hobbled in our ability to coordinate our activities. It was something nobody had thought about. So now what we're thinking about is, if we don't have the telephones working, how do we coordinate our activities? It's one example to think about, and use your best trained cyber people to really push hard on what your key equities are, because when the bad day happens, there's going to be things happening that you never thought about. The final example I'll leave, and then I'll get off the stage and we'll hopefully get into some Q&A, is the fact that, and I mentioned this briefly before, defending your network is not a hardware and software-centric issue anymore. I think of cyber as 3 things. I think of a physical layer, the network that things ride on. I think of a layer above that in which information, because primarily these networks are all about information. Crypto doesn't exist if it's not information that's basically encrypted and allows you to use it as a token. But all information needs a network to live on. But the third layer above the physical and the information layer is the cognitive layer. Everything I can think of going back for a while now has led me to the conclusion that really any cyber action that is adverse is ultimately geared towards changing your perception and ultimately your decision making. So we have to stop thinking of cyber as something that only cyber defense people worry about, and we have to start thinking of cyber as the infrastructure by which we perceive and make decisions. The example I'll use, and it's not a great one, but it's what happened, is our cyber defense organizations in the United States government usually report up to the White House, and the White House has a cyber coordinator to allow all the agencies to talk about their policy-related issues and coordinate our activities so the White House knows. And I know Carol knows all about this. And it's in 2016, we received increasing intelligence that a foreign government, it's been publicly said, Russia, we discovered a very significant and robust campaign to affect the outcome of the United States presidential election. The White House began calling for twice-a-week coordination meetings to defend ourselves against what we now realized was an attack on our electoral system. Because we are mostly cyber defense experts focused on hardware, software, and networks, we immediately surmised that the attack or the interference would occur in the electoral systems that tabulate votes. Either the vote machines or the machines that aggregate the votes would be potentially compromised by a Russian cyber attack. We spent weeks, all the weeks, in kind of a red alert mode in the weeks leading up to the election. We never found any evidence of significant attacks on the voting machines and the tabulation machines. What we discovered after the fact was that the program was not focused on physical alteration of votes. What it was focused on is affecting the perceptions of those people doing the voting. As a cyber defender, I felt I had failed because we hadn't fully considered that was going to be the approach of an adversary. So the final thought I'll leave you with is that we move from hardware and software up through the information and protecting it. But ultimately, you got to think about the cyber attack that matters the most is the one that changes your perceptions and your decision making. So with that, I'll go ahead and we'll turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you. I appreciate it.